Lawrence and Trudler arise out of a years-long scheme to lie, repeatedly and brazenly, about the town of Ramapo's financial health while raising over $150 million in municipal bonds. We brought these charges because whether you are a publicly listed company or a municipality, whether you run a corporation or you lead a town, you are not allowed to cook the books, plain and simple. And if you do cook your books and you issue securities to people who rely on those false books, then you have committed federal securities fraud. And that is what we allege today against St. Lawrence and Trudler. To our knowledge, this is the first criminal securities fraud case brought against city officials for accounting fraud in connection with the sale of municipal bonds. But I suspect that it will not be the last. The significance of the municipal bond market cannot be overstated. The U.S. muni bond market exceeds $3.7 trillion. Cities, counties, and states around the country rely every day on municipal bonds to help build schools, hospitals, highways, and so much more. And investors around the world put their hard-earned money into the perceived relative security of these bonds. Investors in the bonds issued by Ramapo and RLDC include not just institutional investors, by the way, but retirees from New York, New Jersey, Florida, and Pennsylvania. These are people, some of them in their 80s, who put their savings into these bonds. There is no place in this market for fraud and manipulation, and there should be no tolerance for it. Unfortunately, for many years, as the indictment alleges in some detail, the bonds issued by the town of Ramapo and the RLDC were built on a foundation of fraud. As specifically alleged, St. Lawrence and Trudler lied repeatedly about the town's finances, deceiving both the citizens of Ramapo as well as thousands of bond investors. This is, by the way, especially troubling because according to the state controller, Ramapo is one of the most fiscally stressed towns in all of New York. It was actually number one in the entire state in 2012 when the controller's office began running its stress tests. So Ramapo can ill afford a scandal like this. At the heart of the fraud was the financing of a 4,500-seat minor league baseball stadium that St. Lawrence wanted built in Ramapo, Provident Bank Park. The problem was that even though St. Lawrence wanted the stadium, as we allege, the people of Ramapo did not. There were other more pressing needs than a shiny new sports stadium. In fact, as also described, 70% of the town's voters rejected the stadium in a referendum in 2011 to guarantee long-term bonds to pay for its construction. So the defendant allegedly found a way to issue bonds in an end run around those voters. As alleged, while assuring the public that no town money would be used for building the stadium, St. Lawrence and Trudler, through lies and accounting manipulations, found a way for the town to fund more than half of the $58 million it cost to build that stadium. As further alleged in the indictment, the defendants then filled the big hole opened up by these costs in the town's general fund with a series of fake accounting entries. And these are listed in part in the chart to my left. In 2011, for example, as noted on the chart, they allegedly made up a fake $3.6 million receivable for that general fund. As noted in item 2, from 2010 to 2015, St. Lawrence also allegedly inflated the general fund with another $3 million some odd dollar amount fake receivable based on an agreement to buy a property known as the Hamlets from the town for, I think, $3.08 million. The sale did not go through. Why? Because it turns out that the land turned out to be a habitat for rattlesnakes, so it couldn't be sold. But as we allege, that did not stop St. Lawrence. He just falsely kept that as an asset on the town's books for a number of years. Item 4, you'll see there's another alleged false receivable for $3.145 million, and then item 5 shows from the indictment a $12 million false balance as well. In fact, as the indictment describes, the trickery got so bad that after telling a bond rating service in a call in January 2013 that the fund balance had remained unchanged the prior year, St. Lawrence told his employees to complete an upcoming debt refinancing, quote, as fast as possible because, in his own recorded words, we're going to have to all be magicians to get some of those numbers. Close quote. So the accounting fraud, as described, allowed the defendants to show a strong operating balance when the bonds were issued, even though in reality, the town was operating at a deficit. In other words, the town was in the red, not in the black, as the cookbooks were showing. And as a direct result of the defendants' alleged fraud, an already stressed and struggling town will end up being harmed even more. The town of Ramapo will have to assume more debt, has had to raise taxes to pay for that added debt, will face higher costs of funding in the market, and is forced to operate a stadium that is losing money, thereby creating a vicious cycle of hardship imposed on the town and its citizens by the defendants' alleged securities fraud as laid out in a lot of detail in the complaint. Not to mention the harm to the integrity of the markets and to people's faith in their elected leaders. As you'll see, this is depicted very simply in the chart to my right. That's the picture of the actual stadium that was built in large part on money from the bond offering. There were misrepresentations made and alleged with respect to the assets, with respect to fund transfers to the Ramapo General Fund, which is what investors look for and look at to see what the relative health of the municipality is. Those statements also relied upon by the part of investors who bought those bonds based on false statements. Before I turn the podium over to our partners, I want to say a few words of thanks to them. As you might imagine, for a landmark and groundbreaking case like this, the first of its kind, as I mentioned, the investigation and prosecution is a result of a lot of hard work and a lot of collaboration to connect the dots and follow the money. I'm joined today by our partner in this and so many of the cases that we bring out of this office, the FBI, led remarkably well by Diego Rodriguez, who is the Assistant Director in charge of the FBI New York Field Office. I want to thank Diego and his team, specifically FBI Special Agent Bill McGrogan, for their incredibly hard work and assistance in this investigation. I'm also joined by Andrew Serezny, a friend and an alum of this office, the Director of the SEC's Enforcement Division. I want to thank him and the SEC for their work and collaboration. As you'll see, when he speaks, they did a lot of work and have additional facts and additional enforcement authorities that he will talk about, and it's a testament to the work of him and his team in bringing a case that is like this that's never been brought before. They really deserve a lot of credit. Also, this case would not have been possible without the work and commitment of the District Attorney for Rockland County, Tom Zugaby, whose investigators worked tirelessly and seamlessly with us in this investigation. So thank you, Tom. And Tom and I have done a lot of things together, including things unrelated to securities fraud, and I'm very proud and thankful for the relationship and the collaboration with the folks from his office in all the ways that we can help serve Rockland County. Lastly, I want to thank the career prosecutors from my own office. They are Jay McMahon and Andy Denver, the AUSAs handling the prosecutions, as well as their supervisors, Perry Carbone and Mimi Roca, the co-chiefs of the White Plains unit. So as you know, we do a lot of cases relating to public corruption out of this office, but public corruption can take many forms. They almost always involve a lack of transparency, a lack of accountability, and a lack of principle. Today's charges describe a form of corruption. It is public corruption meets securities fraud. And so whether you are a state legislator responsible for enacting laws or a municipal executive responsible for a town's finances, you must be accountable. You have to be accountable to the public, and you have to be accountable to the truth. As today's indictment alleges, Christopher St. Lawrence and Aaron Trudler kicked truth and transparency to the curb, selling over $150 million of municipal bond funds on fabricated financials. And in doing so, they defrauded both the citizens of Ramapo and thousands of municipal bond investors, and for that, they will now be held to account. They are innocent until proven guilty, and we will have the opportunity now to prove those charges in a court of law. And now let me call to the podium Diego Rodriguez, head of the FBI here in New York.
Good morning, everyone. In the spring of 2010, Ramapo's town board wanted to build a minor league baseball stadium backed by $16.5 million in long-term bonds to be paid with tax dollars. But it was a swing and a miss. Nearly 70% of the votes cast by the public were against public funding of this project. After the initial resolution was overwhelmingly rejected, Christopher St. Lawrence, the town supervisor, was ready to play ball. He assured people this venture would be privately funded. More than half of the project was allegedly financed on behalf of the town and the taxpayers who voiced their opinion at the general vote didn't know. The Ramapo Local Development Corporation, or the RLDC, was the not-for-profit corporation tasked with the development initiatives in Ramapo, which allowed them to issue the bonds to the public. St. Lawrence served on the RLDC's board of directors and also as their president. And Aaron Truller, an assistant town attorney for the town of Ramapo, served as their executive director. St. Lawrence and Truller allegedly engaged in a complex securities fraud scheme so they could hide the public funds being used for the stadium and other projects. The illegal activity allegedly continued even after the players became aware the town and the RLDC were subjects of a federal investigation. Public corruption poses a fundamental threat to our way of life. Wasting billions of your tax dollars every year investigating public corruption remains among the FBI's top priorities. We're singularly situated to combat this type of corruption with the skills and capabilities to run complex operations. As always, our success is due in large part to the cooperation we receive from our federal, state, and local law enforcement agencies. We'd like to thank our partners from the Southern District of New York, U.S. Attorney Preet Bahara, Perry Carbone, co-chief for the White Plains Division, and the Assistant United States Attorneys in charge of the prosecution, Andrew Dember and Jay McMahon. Many thanks to Rockland County District Attorney Thomas Zugaby and the task force detectives who worked this case with us. We'd also like to recognize the outstanding work of the Securities and Exchange Commission under the leadership of Director Andrew Seresny from their enforcement division for their exceptional contributions and support throughout this investigation. And last but not least, I'd like to extend my sincere congratulations to FBI Supervisory Special Agent Brian O'Rourke and his team for their work on this investigation. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Diego. Now we call the podium Andrew Seresny, Director of Enforcement of the SEC.
Thanks very much, Preet. And Preet and Diego have already outlined the contours of the overall scheme, which we uncovered through our parallel investigation. So let me just focus on the aspects of the case that are unique to the SEC. Let me start by saying that, as you undoubtedly know, and as Preet talked about, the SEC has a keen interest in the accuracy and transparency in filings by municipal issuers. The $3.7 trillion market for municipal securities is critically important to building and maintaining our nation's infrastructure and for financing important public projects. Individuals or retail investors, directly or indirectly, hold more than 75% of the outstanding principal amount of municipal securities, and many such investors held the Ramapo offerings. So it is essential for this market to function with integrity. And we have in recent years been very focused on bringing cases when municipal issuers have misled investors. Today, we also charged Christopher St. Lawrence and Aaron Truller for their roles in this fraud, which we allege included accounting gimmicks designed to inflate the general fund, as well as misstatements concerning revenues from the Ramapo Local Development Corp's projects, including the minor league baseball stadium, all of which misled investors. Put up a chart here which shows the misleading statements that were made in connection with the general fund balances. The top line is what was represented to investors as the balances, and as you can see, that line is very stable. But the actual reality, which is the red line on the bottom, shows the balance decreasing over time, so that by FY14, it was over $14 million in the red. And the difference is very stark. We've also charged, in this case, Michael Klein and Nathan Oberman, as well as the town of Ramapo and the Ramapo Local Development Corporation. Klein is the town attorney for the town of Ramapo, and the case against him relates principally to his role in concealing the fraudulent nature of approximately $3 million receivable that the town kept on the books of its general fund, which was of primary importance to investors for 5 years, from 2009 to 2013. Without that fraudulent receivable, the town's general fund would have been negative in most of the years. We allege that Klein provided the town's auditors with assurances that this receivable was collectible, despite knowing or recklessly disregarding that the payment would not be forthcoming on the timetables represented. In fact, in 2013, we allege that Klein privately acknowledged to a colleague that his representations to the auditors, quote, pushed a gray area too far, unquote. Oberman is the Deputy Finance Director and the receiver of taxes for the town of Ramapo. Our case against Mr. Oberman relates in substantial part to his role in directing improper transfers totaling in excess of $12 million from the ambulance fund to the general fund. Essentially, starting in 2009, we allege that Oberman and St. Lawrence used the ambulance fund, which had a different tax base than the general fund, as a slush fund to artificially inflate the balance of the general fund. We also, in this case, have charged the town of Ramapo and the RLDC with violations. Among other things, we're seeking several layers of protection for investors in Ramapo municipal offerings for the next 5 years. First, we are seeking a court-appointed monitor to review the offering procedures, recommend improvements, and monitor mandated compliance with those recommendations. Second, we're seeking the appointment of an independent audit firm acceptable to the Commission staff to conduct audits of Ramapo's financial statements. Third, we're seeking an order prohibiting the town and the RLDC from offering new bonds until they retain and cooperate with an independent disclosure counsel acceptable to the Commission staff, whose role would be to make recommendations to ensure that the future offering documents are complete and accurate. All of these measures are aimed to ensure that investors are protected going forward. Finally, I wanted to add 2 additional things. First, I'd like to thank Preet for his and his office's hard work and cooperation as we worked in parallel on these investigations. I'm proud of the strong relationship we have with the Southern District, of which, as Preet mentioned, I am an alumnus, and also would like to acknowledge the assistance of the Rockland County District Attorney's Office and the FBI. This case is an outgrowth of our recent efforts to work with public corruption prosecutors and investigators, in addition to our historical work with securities and economics crimes units of U.S. Attorney's Office and with securities fraud units of the FBI on cases that touch the public finance sector. Second, I'd like to recognize the SEC staff who worked on this case. This case was a joint effort of the New York Regional Office and the Public Finance Abuse Unit, one of our specialized enforcement units, which was previously known as the Municipal Securities and Public Pensions Unit. We renamed this unit recently to call it the Public Finance Abuse Unit to recognize its broader scope and role. The staff that handled this matter included Daniel Loss, Creighton Papier, Celeste Chase, Alexander Vasilescu, Louis Rendazzo, John Wilcox, and Mark Zahner. Leanne Gaunt, the chief of our Public Finance Abuse Unit, and Sanjay Wadhwa, the senior associate director of the New York office, supervised the investigation. I could not be more proud of the staff efforts on this investigation. Thank you.
Thanks, Andrew. Now we'll hear from the great Rockland County DA, Tom Zuckerby.
Good morning, everyone. Let me also start by expressing my sincere gratitude for our partners, U.S. Attorney Preet Bahara and his entire team, FBI Assistant Director in Charge Diego Rodriguez and his team, and Andrew Seresny, Director of the SEC Enforcement Division. There are no better partners. The criminal charges just announced by U.S. Attorney Bahara advance our ongoing battle against public corruption and are the direct result of the continuing work of our Public Corruption Task Force. At its core, the task force is a force multiplier for Rockland County. It is a true collaboration between my office, the FBI, and the United States Attorney, using the tools, the laws, and the resources of both state and federal government to attack an epidemic of greed, dishonesty, and abuse of power that continues to infect our political system at every level of government. By working collaboratively, we bring to bear all of our collective power and authority to investigate and explore criminal activity by public officials, leaders who believe state and federal laws simply do not apply to them. And today's indictment is a prime example of such hubris. As a town supervisor, Christopher St. Lawrence took an oath to honestly and faithfully serve his residents. But instead, it's alleged that this public servant shamelessly exploited his position for a personal agenda. According to the indictment, by deliberately misrepresenting the finances of the town for the purpose of securing a loan, Supervisor St. Lawrence placed the taxpayers in jeopardy, and he defrauded investors. If a regular homeowner engaged in such conduct, it would be called mortgage fraud. Public officials, whether elected or appointed, are more than mere employees. They are servants of the public interest, and we must insist on absolute honesty, integrity, and trustworthiness from every one of them. Public corruption advances the selfish interests of a dishonest few over the interests of the great many who work hard and who obey the law. While I believe that the overwhelming majority of our public officials serve honorably, those who corrupt the operations of government rob their communities, their friends, and their neighbors of the fundamental right to honest government. Simply put, the people must be able to place their trust in their public servants at every level of government. I am pleased to continue our longstanding partnership with the United States Attorney's Office and the FBI as we work together to combat this pernicious problem. We will see to it that the crimes involving public corruption, waste, fraud, and abuse are prosecuted to the fullest extent of the law. Thank you all very much.
Thanks, Tom. Happy for your questions. It's a complicated case that involved, like a lot of cases that we do out of this office. The nature of its complexity is maybe evidenced by the fact that no one has ever brought a case like this before, ever, as far as we know, in the country. And it takes time to connect the dots and figure out where the money went and figure out what the misrepresentations were. And for SEC staff working in parallel with us and the FBI and the Rockland County DA's office to investigate thoroughly and completely and comprehensively, and even still, I should say the investigation is ongoing, so it's not even done yet. It's a complex investigation that has a lot of moving parts, and we bring cases as aggressively and quickly as we can, consistent with making sure we're doing the right thing. We have all the facts that we need to have. Yeah. That's not alleged, no. Yeah.
Repeat the question.
What penalty do they face from the SEC, and what are you doing about it?
No.
Our action against them seeks penalties, as well as conduct-based injunctions. And so we would seek that as well as a general injunction. Our penalties are governed by a statutory structure of tiered penalties depending upon the level of activity and whether there's fraud involved and whether there's harm to investors. We can provide you with statutory references for that, but it depends on the number of violations that are found, and then there are maximums that can be reached for that.
I never commented who in particular we're looking at. I did say, as I sometimes say, I don't always say, that the investigation is ongoing and we're going to continue to follow the facts. Yeah.
Sir, the information is that Mr. St. Lawrence not only served as the town supervisor, but was also the town finance director. Would you consider that a best practice for a municipality, and did it in any way facilitate the alleged fraud?
Yeah, I'm not going to comment on best practices for municipalities. Obviously, given the charges here, there were a lot of best or even moderate practices that weren't followed, and I'll leave it at that. Yeah. Yeah, you.
You said this is, as far as you know, the first of its kind in terms of municipal fraud involving public officials. Is your office wanting maybe more focus on this going forward?
Yeah, look, at any time the office uncovers, working with our partners, a type of corruption or a type of fraud, you ask yourselves the question, does it happen elsewhere? And I think Andrew has already pointed out that they have had the foresight in a lot of places to start working with public corruption units of U.S. Attorney's offices around the country. So it stands to reason that when you develop some understanding and expertise of a particular kind of crime taking place,